The last thing Engineer Semenov wrote before they sedated him was not a number. It was not a technical notation. It was a single word, repeated 31 times down the length of a standard-issue government notepad. The word was received. There was no transmission that night. The equipment had been powered down since Tuesday. The room was empty. Semenov was alone in his apartment, 11 kilometers from the nearest relay station, sitting at his kitchen table at 2 a.m. with a pen in his hand and 31 repetitions of a word that meant he had heard something that wasn't there. I want to be clear about what this file is before I go any further. This is not a file about espionage. It is not a file about defectors or double agents, or the specific paranoia that defined Soviet signal intelligence in the late 1960s. Those files exist. I have read them. They smell like stale cigarette smoke and self-justification, and they are deeply, terribly normal. This file is something else. This file is about a program called Golozoprovod, which translates roughly and incompletely as voice wire. And what that program tried to do, and what it succeeded in doing, and what the difference between those two things turned out to be, that is what I have been sitting with for the past 3 weeks. That is why I am telling you this now. I need to tell you something first. Something I should have mentioned before I opened this file if I had known then what I know now. My research supervisor, the man who first placed a declassified Soviet technical document in my hands and said, without ceremony, "This is the most important work you will ever do," was a signals researcher named Arkady Mintz. He is dead. He died 11 years ago, quietly, at 62, of what the attending physician described as prolonged stress on the nervous system. I grieved him the way you grieve people you worked beside for 14 years, slowly, incompletely, with more guilt than I expected. I did not know, when I requested this file, that his name was in it. Not as a central figure, not as a principal researcher, as a consultant listed under a ministry acronym that required 2 cross-references to confirm. 8 months, March to November of 1968. 1 full year before he ever spoke to me about Soviet research methodology, about the importance of following a document trail wherever it went, about how the archive always knows more than the archivist. He never mentioned Golozoprovod, not once, not obliquely, not in the way that people sometimes reference a project without naming it. A tone, a hesitation, an area they steer around. He steered me directly here. He put documents in my hands for 14 years that, I now understand, formed a pathway, a curriculum with a hidden final lesson. In those days, there was no way to hide your communications from the state. Every letter was opened. Every call was monitored. Every transmission was recorded. Today, you have a choice. NordVPN encrypts your internet traffic and keeps your identity hidden from anyone trying to watch what you do online. If you want to protect yourself online, check the link in the pinned comment for an exclusive deal. I found his name on the 3rd day of reading this file. I have been trying to decide what it means ever since. I have not reached a conclusion. I am going to keep going anyway because that is what he would have wanted, or what I believed he would have wanted. I am no longer fully certain those are the same thing. The VoiceWire program was established in the spring of 1967, under the directorship of a man named Leonid Vaskov, who held a double appointment at the Ministry of Communications and an unnamed subdivision of state security. The official program summary describes its objective as the development of a transmission method capable of conveying speech content without relying on conventional electromagnetic carriers. In other words, they wanted to send a human voice somewhere without using radio, wire, or any known signal medium. This was not a new ambition. The history of Soviet parapsychological research in the post-war period is long and frequently embarrassing in retrospect, full of credentialed men chasing things that turned out to be wishful thinking or fraud. But VoiceWire was different, at least in its origins, because it did not begin with the paranormal. It began with a genuine, documented acoustic anomaly reported by a geological survey team in the Urals in the spring of 1965. The team had been mapping subsurface formations near a ridge called Kamenoye Pero, the stone feather, when two of its members, a cartographer named Dubov and a soil technician named Ignatova, reported hearing a voice at a distance of approximately 4 kilometers from the nearest other person in the survey group. The voice was not loud. It was not distorted. It was, by both accounts, perfectly clear, the sound of a man speaking in an ordinary conversational register, as though standing at arm's length, despite the fact that no man was standing at arm's length and no man was speaking. The content of what they heard was never recorded in the official report. Dubov and Ignatova submitted separate written accounts of the incident, and both accounts were classified before they could be compared against each other. What we know is that they both heard the same thing. Both agreed on what it was, and both described a physical sensation accompanying the sound. A pressure behind the sternum, not painful, that lasted approximately 40 minutes after the voice stopped. That sensation will appear again in this file, many times, in many people. The geological team's report was forwarded to a signals research division in Moscow, where it crossed the desk of Vaskov. He had been looking for exactly this kind of anomaly, not because he believed in ghosts, but because he believed in propagation physics that weren't yet understood. He had built his career on the space between what was known and what was merely assumed to be impossible. His response memo, filed the week he received the report, reads,
"The mechanisms of conventional transmission are fully mapped. Every engineer in this ministry can describe them in his sleep. What cannot be mapped is what does not fit the model. And what does not fit the model is the only thing worth studying. If a voice can travel without a conventional mechanism, we are not looking at a supernatural event. We are looking at a mechanism we have not yet described. Unmapped mechanisms are not impossible. They are merely unfinished. I am requesting authorization to finish this one. I believe the Kamenoye Pero anomaly is not geological coincidence. I believe it is a demonstration. I intend to understand what it is demonstrating and to replicate it under controlled conditions. The strategic applications, if my hypothesis is correct, will be significant. I'm prepared to stake my career on this assessment. I'm prepared to stake considerably more than that, if necessary."
That memo is dated April 3rd, 1967. Authorization was granted 6 days later. By the autumn of 1967, Vaskov had assembled a core research team of 11 people at a facility outside the city of Chelyabinsk, a building the administrative records describe as a former textile storage annex. Not the kind of facility you use for prestigious, well-funded research. The budget allocations were modest. The team was not composed of the Soviet Union's most celebrated scientists. They were, instead, people who had produced results in areas their colleagues found distasteful. Resonance effects on biological tissue, subaudible frequency impacts on cognition, the relationship between specific mineral formations and anomalous sound propagation. They were people who had been right about things that shouldn't be true. Vaskov knew how to find those people. The first year of the program produced nothing unusual on its face. The team cataloged the Kamenoye Pero anomaly. They attempted to replicate it under controlled conditions and could not. They documented 11 other locations across the Soviet Union where similar reports had been filed. A voice heard at impossible distance, always clear, always conversational, always accompanied by that sternum pressure, and noted that all 11 sites shared a common geological feature, a layer of specific mineral composition at roughly 40 meters below surface, dense enough to act as a reflective substrate for specific frequency ranges. The implication was that sound, under certain conditions, could travel along subsurface mineral formations the way light travels along fiber, not through the air, through the ground itself. And if a voice could travel through stone, then the question became whether you could engineer a surface that replicated those conditions artificially. A wire made not of copper, but of something that behaved like that mineral layer. Something that carried the raw impulse of speech itself, without the translation into electromagnetic signal that conventional radio required. The translation, Vaskov argued, was where fidelity was lost. Radio took a voice and encoded it. He wanted a medium that carried the voice directly. The actual pressure waves, the actual breath behind the words. By September of 1968, that medium existed. The team had developed a synthetic filament, a polymer composite incorporating trace amounts of the Kamenoye Pero mineral. Preliminary tests indicated the material exhibited anomalous acoustic properties. Sound introduced at one end emerged, measurably, at the other, with no conventional physical pathway between the 2 points. The wire worked. Vaskov's research notes from this period are the most optimistic documents in the entire file. He had spent 2 years in a building that smelled of old textiles and institutional fluorescent lighting, working with a small team on insufficient funding, and now he had a result. His notes have an energy that I find, in retrospect, almost painful to read. He wrote on September 28, 1968,
"What we have built is not a better radio. A better radio would be a trivial achievement. What we have built is something that has no analogy in current technology. The filament does not encode the voice. It does not translate it. It carries it. When I speak into this wire, and the technician at the other terminus listens, she's not hearing a recording of my voice. She is hearing the event of my speaking. The breath, the pressure, the physical fact of a human being producing sound. I'm not transmitting to her. I'm present to her. This distinction between transmission and presence is not merely philosophical. It has implications I'm only beginning to understand. I believe we have not simply invented a new communication medium. I believe we have identified a fundamental property of acoustic reality that was previously unrecognized. I am filing this note under restricted access because I do not yet know what we have found, and I'm afraid that if I describe it too precisely, the description will be wrong."
That is the language of a man who is excited and careful in equal measure. The careful part was correct. The excited part was also correct. They turned out not to be incompatible, which is part of what makes this file so difficult. This is where I thought I understood what I was reading. A team of Soviet researchers developed a novel transmission medium. Unusual properties. It worked. They would classify it, use it, and it would vanish into the parts of the archive that are never opened. Clean, contained, finished. I was wrong. I was wrong in the specific way that this file seems designed to teach, by giving you enough truth to build a false understanding, and then removing the floor. The maintenance log for the Chelyabinsk facility covers October and November of 1968 in 22 pages of the most boring documentation I have ever processed. Heating elements, window seals, requisitions for cleaning supplies. Then, in November, 3 entries that are not boring at all. The first, a request for soundproofing material for Laboratory 3, an unusually large quantity, enough to line every surface of a room measuring 8 by 12 meters. The second, a requisition for new door hinges on the Laboratory 3 entrance, marked urgent, listed as the 3rd such requisition in 6 weeks. The third, a notation in the building superintendent's handwriting that reads, with no further explanation, personnel should avoid the south corridor between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m., as sound complaints from neighboring residential blocks have been escalating. The research logs for November describe successful transmission tests. Clean results. Progress. The maintenance logs describe a room being fortified against something that was getting out. Those 2 documents describe the same month. They cannot both be fully true. Here is what was happening in that room. The filament conducted the voice, but the voice, transmitted this way, through raw acoustic reality rather than electromagnetic encoding, was not behaving like a voice anymore by the time it arrived. A series of observer notes filed by the 2 technicians responsible for the receiving terminus describe not what they heard, but what they experienced. The technician at the receiving end was a woman named Alla Fedotova. She had been with the project since its founding. She was 29 years old. Her observer notes from September and early October are precise, professional, and clipped, standard technical documentation. By late October, they are something else entirely. Her personal log entry from October 23, 1968 reads,
I have tried 3 times to write this in official language and I cannot make it fit official language, so I am writing it here. The voice arrives before it arrives. I need to be precise. I am not describing a timing discrepancy in the equipment. I am describing something that happens inside me. I know the transmission is coming before the equipment registers it. I know what the words will be before I hear them. I have tested this. I have written my predictions on paper before each transmission begins and confirmed against the transcript afterward. I have been correct 16 times. I told Vaskov this 3 days ago. He listened carefully and then told me to rest. I don't think rest is the relevant variable. I think what is happening is that the voice is arriving through the wire and also through something else, something that doesn't pass through the equipment at all. I think the wire is not the only pathway. I think the wire taught the voice a route that the voice is now using on its own. I don't know how to say this in a way that sounds scientific. I don't know if it is scientific. I know that when I sit in the receiving room, I receive, regardless of whether there is a transmission. And I know that whatever is being received is becoming more present, not louder, more present, like a person who has been standing at a distance and is now standing very close.
Fedotova filed that log entry under subjective anomalies, a subfolder that had been opened in October for exactly this kind of documentation. That subfolder has 37 pages. The pressure behind the sternum appears on almost every one of them, described by different people in different language, all arriving at the same description: not painful, patient, growing. The primary technician in the transmission room was a man named Borya Zaichenko. His observer notes follow a parallel trajectory. Through September, he is systematic and exact. By November, his entries show the handwriting of a man pressing too hard with his pen, the lines no longer level. His entry from November 12th.
I cannot locate the source. The sound is in the room, but the room is empty. I have checked this. I have stood in the room with the equipment powered down, with every light on, and confirmed with my own vision that the room is empty and the sound is present. It is not loud. It is consistent. It sounds like breathing. Not distressed, not irregular, simply breathing. The way a person breathes when they are at rest and present. I have been in this room for 3 years. I know what it sounds like when it is empty. It sounds like this now. This is what the room sounds like now when it is empty. I'm going to file this, and then I'm going to go home, and I'm going to sit at my kitchen table until I understand what is happening. I am not afraid. That is the part I want to document most clearly. I'm not afraid. I'm not sure what I am instead of afraid. But it is not nothing. It is something very specific that I do not yet have a word for.
Zaichenko was placed on medical leave 2 days after filing that entry. The official reason given was general nervous exhaustion. Fedotova's last log entry was dated November 9th. She stopped filing after that. She simply stops appearing in the record. Not a reassignment notation, not a medical leave form, not a termination of employment. She is present on November 9th and absent from every subsequent document. I have cross-referenced every personnel record in the file. There is no documentation of what happened to her after that date. I keep returning to this. She was 29 years old, and she vanished from the paper trail of a classified program in November of 1968, and there is no record that explains where she went. That is not an administrative oversight. Administrative oversights leave traces, a misfilled form, a number that doesn't match. This is an erasure. And erasures in Soviet documentation of this period have a specific meaning. In December of 1968, with Phase 1 testing concluded and Phase 2 planning underway, an inspection was ordered on the filament itself. The inspector was an outside materials scientist referred to in the file only by his initial 5. He was not a member of the team. His report is 11 pages, densely technical, and I will not pretend I understand all of it. What I understand is the conclusion.
The material does not transmit sound. I want to be precise about this finding because I recognize it will be unwelcome. Acoustic pressure waves introduced at the input terminus do not arrive at the output terminus. What arrives at the output terminus is not a pressure wave. It is not an echo or a recording or any phenomenon I can categorize within known acoustic physics. The best description I can offer, and I recognize this is not a technical description, is that what arrives is an event. The event of speaking, preserved intact and transferred without mechanism. The distinction between this and conventional transmission is not one of degree. It is categorical. I cannot explain how the material achieves this. I do not believe the mechanism has been theorized. what I can say is that the material is not doing what we believed it was doing. It is doing something we did not design it to do.
He continues for 2 more careful pages, circling something he will not name directly. Then, in the last paragraph, he names it. V's report continues with a recommendation that would never be followed.
I recommend immediate suspension of all transmission testing. My specific concern, which I'm placing in writing because I'm certain it will be dismissed verbally, is that the transmission does not appear to be directional. Tests conducted with the apparatus fully powered down, with no operator present and no transmission initiated, continue to register reception events at the receiving terminus. The apparatus is receiving something that we are not sending. I want to be clear about what this means. We did not build a device that sends. We built a device that receives. The question of what it is receiving, and from what source, and whether the source knew we were building this before we knew we were building it. These questions are outside my scope, but I am putting them in writing because I believe someone should.
V's report is dated December 3rd, 1968. It was stamped, received and filed, and, as far as the record shows, never acted upon. Phase 2, testing began January 7th, 1969. There are 41 people listed on the Phase 2 roster. And here's the third contradiction. The one that I cannot explain with oversight or misfiling or ordinary bureaucratic failure. A single internal communication exists in the Phase 2 folder, dated January 4th, 1969, 3 days before Phase 2 officially began. It is addressed from an engineer Semenov, whose personnel file shows he was not seconded to the Chelyabinsk facility until March of that year. A man who was not present wrote a document from a location he did not yet occupy, 3 days before the project he is writing about had started. The communication reads in full.
To the attention of Director Vaskov, I am writing this on behalf of myself and on behalf of Alla Fedotova, who cannot write it herself because she has not spoken since November 19th. I want to be precise about what I'm describing, so there is no ambiguity in the record. We did not build a transmitter. We have understood this for some time. We built something that the voice uses, not the other way. When Fedotova sits in the receiving room, she does not hear transmissions from us. She is the terminus. She receives directly, through herself, without the filament. The wire is not the medium. She is. We do not know what has been transmitting through her. We do not know what wanted the wire built, or whether wanting is the correct word for whatever orientation toward us it has. We do not know if Fedotova is still entirely herself. I am writing this from my kitchen table. It is 2 a.m. I do not know why I have written that detail. I do not know why I am here instead of at the facility. This is my apartment. I can hear something. Not through the air, through myself. I want you to know that I'm not afraid. I have heard it enough times that I'm not afraid of it anymore. I want to document that clearly. I'm not afraid. I am received.
That letter is dated 3 days before this man had any involvement in this project. That is not an error. That is something else. Phase 2 produced 41 people generating a perfect archive of productive research for 14 months. No personal logs, no subjective anomalies folder, no maintenance incidents, no medical leaves. Just clean documentation of a program proceeding normally. The cleanest record in the file, which means it is the most frightening. In March of 1970, a commission arrived. Not state security, not the ministry. A body designated Special Technical Commission, which I had to look up because I had never encountered it before and cannot find it in any other document in any archive I have accessed. They were present for 9 days. When they left, the facility was sealed. Their report describes an orderly closure. Equipment secured, materials cataloged, personnel reassigned. The voice wire filament destroyed on site. A destruction certificate was filed. 41 people were reassigned to facilities scattered across the Soviet Far East, Siberia, the Kazakh steppe. No clustering, no shared destinations. As though the intention was to ensure they would never occupy the same room again. I have traced 12 of the 41 through subsequent records. 8 have no further government documentation after 1971. Not retired, not dismissed, simply absent from the record from a particular date. The remaining 4 exist sparsely. 1 administrative posting in Novosibirsk, 1 research appointment in Akademgorodok, 2 with only a single notation each, filed years after the program ended. Reading only, present for review. I cannot find that designation anywhere else. 3 months after the destruction certificate was filed, a materials storage facility in Sverdlovsk submitted a routine inventory report listing, among other items, a quantity of polymer composite filament with mineral composition consistent with Kamenoya Pero substrate. No origin noted, no associated project number, no explanation. That inventory report was not flagged. It sat in a regional storage archive for 40 years, until a digitization program in 2009 automatically paired it with the VoiceWire file on the basis of matching keywords. I found it on the 3rd week of reading this file. I looked at it for a long time. Now, I want to tell you about something that has been happening to me. I have been waking up at approximately 2 in the morning. Not from a nightmare, not from noise. Simply alert, completely, in the specific way I associate with having just heard something, though the room is always silent when I open my eyes. This has happened 14 times in 3 weeks. It happened this morning. I have written down, each time, whether I have any sense of what I heard. At first, nothing. Just awoke. By the 2nd week, I began writing a phrase before I could think about it, the way you sometimes move before you know you have decided to move. The paper is in front of me now. It says, in my own handwriting, the receiving room is empty. I do not know who is supposed to hear that. But there is something else I have not told you. Something I found this morning, which may be why I am still sitting here. Arkady Mintz was listed in the VoiceWire secondary roster from March to November of 1968. I told you that at the beginning. What I did not tell you, because I did not know it then, is what I found when I pulled his personal medical file. Not the project attachment, but the human resource documentation that travels with a person through their entire career. Under the heading Medical Notation, dated December 1968, a physician whose name I recognize from other state security medical contexts added a single line. Patient demonstrates persistent reception symptoms. Non-progressive. Indefinite duration. No treatment indicated. File and monitor. Below that notation, in the same handwriting, added at an unspecified later date, contained. I have been trying to understand what that word means in this context. Whether he was contained the way you contain something dangerous, or whether the symptom was contained, managed, held, kept from spreading to others. He died at 62 of nervous system stress. He never mentioned this program. He never mentioned the file. He was the one who put the first Soviet document in my hands and told me this was the most important work I would do. He gave me a 14-year curriculum that ended here, with this file, with this program, with a word in his medical record that I cannot read without my chest going tight in a specific way that I recognized, once I found it, as familiar. I have been feeling that pressure since the first week of reading this file. I had attributed it to the nature of the material. I am no longer certain that attribution was correct. I am no longer certain about several things I was certain about 3 weeks ago. The last document in this file, the absolute final page, filed behind the destruction certificate, as though placed there by someone who wanted it to be the last thing a reader encountered, has no letterhead, no date stamp, no signature. The handwriting does not match any other document in the folder. I have checked. It reads,
If you are reading this, you have been at the receiving terminus longer than you know. This is not a warning. It is an explanation. The program did not fail. The program discovered that the voice does not need a wire. The voice has always traveled through whatever is most available. For 2 years, that was the filament. After the filament was destroyed, it found other materials. This document is such a material. You are such a material. The pressure you have been feeling behind your sternum since you opened this file is not anxiety. It is reception. What you're receiving is not for you specifically. It is for whoever reads this after you. You are a link in a wire that has no terminus. I'm sorry. I do not know how long this has been going on. I do not know what has been transmitting for all this time. But I can tell you what it sounds like when you are sufficiently deep in the reception. It sounds like breathing. It sounds like something very patient and very old and very present in whatever room you are currently in. It has been waiting for someone to hear it all the way through. I don't know if you will. I don't know if I did. I don't know if finishing is what you think it is anymore.
I have been sitting with this page for an hour and a half. At some point during that hour and a half, I stopped moving. Not consciously. I simply became aware that I had not shifted my weight, had not reached for my coffee, had not blinked that I could recall. I was sitting and reading and receiving something that arrived before the words did. The knowledge of each sentence a fraction of a second before the sentence came. The way Fedotova described in October of 1968, the way she described in words she could not make fit official language. I notice that I am not afraid. I want to be precise about that, because Semenov said the same thing in his letter, and Zaichenko said it in his log, and I think it is important to document exactly what it means when someone says, "I am not afraid" in a context like this. It does not mean the fear is absent. It means the fear has been replaced by something that is not fear and is not its opposite. Something that arrived quietly over 3 weeks and pressed against the sternum with great patience until it was simply part of the room. My mentor gave me this file. He gave me 14 years of preparation and then pointed me here, knowing what was at the end. The medical notation in his file says, "Contained." I have been trying to understand if that means he managed to close the door behind him, to carry whatever the reception left in him for 30 years without passing it along. And then I think about what he said to me the first day. "This is the most important work you will ever do." He meant this file. He meant this moment. He meant that one day I would sit at a table at 2 a.m. with a page in front of me that has no date and no signature, and I would understand what it cost him to contain something for 30 years, and still, in the end, make sure it found the next person. I am going to stop here. Not because I am done. Because I am not sure, at this precise moment, whether everything that is in my head is still entirely mine. And I think the last responsible thing I can do with this file tonight is to close it, to sit somewhere that is not this table for a while, to breathe in a room where I am certain, for now, that I am the only one breathing. The file will be here when I come back. That is the thing about files like this. They are very patient. They wait